Hello and welcome to Mississippi Insight. I'm Byron Brown. Thank you for joining us. This week, after 48 days, the state of Mississippi lifts the boil water advisory for the city of Jackson. But concerns remain as leaders search for long-term safeguards against another water emergency. Also, legal advocate Corey Stern on his suit against the city and the state over unsafe drinking water. And Dr. Jennifer Sloane Ziegler with the American Society of Civil Engineers. That group's infrastructure report card reminds us water problems are by no means limited to the capital city. A jam-packed Sunday morning is coming up now on Mississippi Insight. Thursday's announcement by Governor Tate Reeves was welcome news for more than 160,000 consumers of Jackson's water system. And it was news to most of us that state health officials had begun comprehensive sampling across the city. 2 rounds of those tests confirmed that the system was finally pumping clean, safe drinking water through the lines. But even now, many Jacksonians are expressing their lingering doubts about the city water. And Governor Reeves himself noted there is a long way to go in shoring up Jackson's water infrastructure.
I do believe it's very important that we set expectations up front. While we have restored water quality, this system is still imperfect. It is possible, although I pray not inevitable, that there will be further interruptions. We cannot perfectly predict what may go wrong with such a broken system in the future. We do know that the experts tell us that the state's boil water notice can end today.
It took state and federal intervention in Jackson's water crisis to get where we are today. And despite years of problems and pleas for assistance, that intervention didn't really happen until Pearl River flooding late last month caused systemic failures at the O.B. Curtis treatment plant. The local, state, and federal partnership remains tenuous even now. And comments by Governor Reeves Thursday underscored a tense relationship with city leaders, even as it came under renewed media scrutiny.
And while some in the national media have attempted to paint a narrative of division, there has been one common focus throughout all of this, and that focus has been restoring clean water. I don't read the city's daily reports, and I don't think you should either.
We're taking a quick break. But when we return, one of the people behind a massive water settlement in Flint, Michigan, talks about his federal lawsuit against Jackson and Mississippi. We'll hear from legal advocate Corey Stern when Mississippi Insight continues. Among the huge challenges that Jackson leaders face with regard to water is a major lawsuit over alleged lead contamination. Almost 2,000 children are being represented in a lawsuit against the city and the state, claiming former leaders knew about lead in city drinking water. An event Wednesday at the Mississippi Children's Museum drew families as attorneys from the law firm Levy Konigsberg LLP briefed parents on the suit. It was filed in federal court last year. One of the attorneys behind it, Corey Stern, talked with us last October about his allegations. And 12 News' Town Talk caught up with him again on Wednesday.
Corey, you've had a lot to say over the last year about Jackson's water problems. You filed suit against the city and the state on behalf of hundreds of children. Remind us what the lawsuit is all about.
Sure. So beginning in the early 1990s, every city in the United States who runs its own water utility was required to report to the federal government and to the state where the lead service lines were in their cities. It's part of something called the Lead and Copper Rule, which went into effect in the early 90s. And part of the rule is requirements of municipalities and state governments to make sure that their water is as safe as it can be, and it's standardized across the United States through federal rules. Jackson has never complied with the lead and copper rules. So they've never reported, or at least as of 6 months ago, they had never reported where all the lead service lines were in the ground. And why that's important is, in order to know how to treat water to make sure it's safe, you've got to know where the lead pipes are. So since the early 90s and probably before until today, Jackson has repeatedly received citations, tickets of sorts. Like if we were driving too fast on the highway, we get a ticket. If you're not treating water correctly or if your plant is bad, you'll get a ticket. They've gotten violation notices for decades, but there's never been any real force or effect to those violation notices, because no one's ever really required of them to do the things that they need to do. And the result of that is that bad water or good water, when it flows through lead pipes, if the water's not treated appropriately, will pick up some of the lead. And so what the lawsuit is about is thousands of children in the city of Jackson who for years have been exposed to water that has lead in it. And when kids drink water with lead or use water with lead, lead is a neurotoxin. That's just fancy for it. It causes brain damage if it gets into your brain. And so the case is on behalf of children, just to make sure that over the course of their lives, anything they may have lost economically or anything they may have felt about themselves can be compensated as a result of what the city didn't do, what the state didn't do, what the federal government didn't do, what private contractors didn't do to ensure that the water was safe.
Now, Corey, what was your reaction? I mean, when you heard the news about that the city's water system had essentially just broken down?
Yeah. So my reaction was empathy and sadness and fear for our clients and for people who aren't our clients. I mean, nobody in the United States should ever be without clean water, let alone without water. Secondly, I was not, or secondarily, I was not surprised. When you fail in so many ways to treat water properly or to maintain your water system properly, you're just dealing with a ticking time bomb, and sometimes ticking time bombs, and this is one that went off. There were ways in which the city could have more properly weatherized the plant or their utility, meaning create efficiencies within the plant and upgrades to the plant that would be better served, or that would better serve the community in times when there would be flooding or really bad storms. And so the city, I think, is finally starting to learn that the way in which it's treated its water utility has had drastic effects on individuals in the community and on the community as a whole.
And now, last November, let's talk about that, Corey. You had reached a $626 million settlement with the city of Flint and the state of Michigan over the city's water emergency. So are you concerned at all that such a big dollar settlement with Jackson and Mississippi could just make it more difficult financially for leaders to address our water deficiencies here?
There's always a yin and yang if there's a resolution with a governmental entity, because governments are funded typically by the people or by other forms of government. And so Jackson gets money from the federal government to deal with Jackson issues. Jackson gets money from taxpayers to deal with Jackson issues. So one of the things that we were able to do in Flint was to create a settlement process where it's really not falling on the people to pay themselves. The state used bonding over 30 years at a very low interest rate in order to pay it, and the city had insurance. And so it's not like that money is coming from the residents of Flint to pay their own settlement. The same could be true in Jackson, but to this day, we're a long way from that, because when I hear the mayor talk about the water situation, he's very defensive about it, and he also has not been super transparent about it. For a year or so, I think I've heard on numerous occasions him say the water is safe, the water is fine, and when I hear that, it's very similar to what I heard in Flint for the first year or 2 or 3 when I was there. There's a lot of denial. There's always this effort to get ducks in a row so that everybody's giving the same message. There's always a defensiveness when something goes bad and you're dealing with politicians, because every politician wants to get reelected, and it's hard to get reelected when people are real mad at you. So until there's more transparency from the government about what has happened in the past and what's happening now, I think we're a long way away from a settlement. But in terms of funding that settlement, once the government officials get to a point where they at least concede some responsibility, if they have any desire to resolve these cases with us or with anybody else, they're going to have to find creative ways to make sure that the people who are paid are not ultimately paying themselves over years and years and years.
All right, now speaking of Flint, what have Flint and Michigan authorities accomplished since that settlement in dealing with their own water issues? And do you believe that Jackson and Mississippi can accomplish something similar?
Sure. So In order to deal with the issues, the first thing you have to do is identify the problem. And it took Flint a little while to acknowledge that there was a problem, but they had been making efforts to fix the problem despite not publicly acknowledging that it actually existed. And it's not that hard of a fix. There's a lot of narrative where people think that the only way to fix this is to replace all of the lead pipes in every city in the country. That would be great, but there's an easier and more cost-effective way to do it, and it's just to treat the water properly. And even though the water that folks in Jackson have been receiving in the same way that folks in Flint were receiving bad water has been tainted with lead, once Flint switched to good water, to well-treated water, there was a coating that developed on all of the lead pipes that made the water able to be safely flowing through those pipes without replacing the pipes. And the same is true in Jackson. Regardless of what the folks from FEMA might be saying or what the government officials might be saying, first and foremost, they should be determining how to treat the water properly and let it start flowing to the pipes, through the pipes as much as possible, because that in and of itself would solve the problem.
Well, Corey, what do you have to say to Jacksonians watching this and just coping with this ongoing crisis with our drinking water?
Yeah, so this should never happen to you. This should never happen in the United States of America. This should never happen in any community, let alone your community. And the lessons from Flint for those folks in the community could be well served here if people would watch and listen. And it starts with self-advocacy. One of the greatest things that happened in Flint was how much the residents were advocating for themselves. They weren't scared of the governor. They weren't scared of the mayor. They weren't scared of the EPA. They stood up time after time after time after time, even when people were telling them that their water was good. They'd show up at council meetings and they'd show up at the governor's office with jugs and bottles of water that clearly was not clean, that clearly was not safe. And it's because of that advocacy, beyond just what lawyers do, it's because of the self-advocacy that people really got attention. It was a mom in Flint who got the EPA involved when no one else would listen. It was a mom in Flint who got the state government involved when no one else wanted to listen. It was a mom in Flint who insisted that the city do inspections of all the homes on her block to decide if, or determine if there was lead in the pipes. And a lot of times I think people think that a lawyer will do all of that for them, and that's why lawyers have jobs. But at the end of the day, when people hear from a lawyer, it never sounds as loud, it never sounds as forceful as when someone speaks for themselves. And I can't do anything to touch the advocacy of that Flint mom who really brought down the curtain on the entire crisis. And I urge everybody in Jackson to stand up, to ensure for yourselves that your water is safe by requiring the folks in government to make it safe.
Coming up, Mississippi's poor marks for water and other infrastructure explained. It's Mississippi Insight, only on WJTV. Jackson's water crisis highlights something that all communities in Mississippi should keep in mind. Much of the infrastructure in our state, water and otherwise, is in perilous condition. We want to bring in someone who can walk us through those issues. Join us via Zoom is Dr. Jennifer Sloane Ziegler. She is a past president of the Mississippi section of the American Society of Civil Engineers, and she's a co-author of that group's 2020 report card on Mississippi infrastructure. Dr. Sloane Ziegler, welcome to Mississippi Insight.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Mississippi drew a grade of D+ in that 2020 report card. Our drinking water infrastructure pulled a D grade. That's not just Jackson, but statewide. Talk about the challenges that many of our viewers may not appreciate in the effort to provide safe drinking water across the state.
Sure. So as you said, Mississippi received a grade of a D for the drinking water, which means that there are some improvements that we can make. Unfortunately, a lot of people don't see the infrastructure that we need in order to actually get drinking water to their house. It is buried underground, or the pumps and everything are behind fences, so you can't see it. And so sometimes out of sight is out of mind until you have a crisis like this that happens. A lot of times we think that the infrastructure is just fine, and then we'll discover, because it's underground, that there have been leaks for a long time, or things that need to be improved that we didn't know about because we couldn't actually see the infrastructure. We also have to balance that with making sure that the citizens can actually afford the water. So as you know, there are water costs money. It costs money to pull it up out of the ground, to treat it, to send it out to people so they can use it. But we want to be mindful that people need drinking water for everything that they do, basically, and we need to make sure that it's affordable. So balancing the need to improve and maintain our system and the money that costs with how much we're actually getting from the revenues that we charge people to make sure that they can still afford it, that's something that we have to think about every day.
How do we compare to other states? Is drinking water infrastructure an outstanding issue nationwide?
It is an outstanding issue nationwide, but Mississippi is a little bit worse off than the rest of the country. If you look at the national report card, which received an overall grade of a C-, drinking water received also a C-, whereas Mississippi received a D. However, if you look at different states, you'll see that those scores vary. A lot of states for drinking water are in the C and the D range. So we're a little bit worse off than other states, but in some particular areas, in particular states, the drinking water may be worse off than it is in the state of Mississippi.
There's much more in this ASCE report. Wastewater systems in our state drew another D grade. Dams and levees in Mississippi also come in with D grades, and our roads and bridges were graded D-. Are state leaders doing what they should be doing to address these shortcomings in your view?
They're doing what they can. However, we really need a little bit more investment in our infrastructure systems. The IIJA is going to be very beneficial for a lot of our systems. However, it does not provide enough money for the state of Mississippi, actually for any of the states, to fully address all the backlog of projects that we have. The state legislature can turn that money out rather quickly to start addressing some of these concerns, and that should help. But it would be nice if we could see additional sources of revenue to fund some of the more long-term, long outstanding projects that we need to fund.
So do we have a real cost of what it would cost to deal with these issues?
We do, Byron. Actually, for the state of Mississippi, EPA estimates that we'll need approximately $5 billion over the next 20 years to fund safe drinking water infrastructure for the people of Mississippi. That's only for the drinking water component. If you look at what we will receive from IIJA, which will be used for all types of infrastructure, not just drinking water, we are going to be receiving $429 million over 5 years. So if you can compare the numbers, $5 billion over 20 years and $429 million over the next 5 years, you can see that these numbers are not equal and that there needs to be additional investment in order to adequately address the infrastructure concerns that we have.
So the bipartisan infrastructure bill is really just a drop in the bucket of what we really need to do is to deal with our issues.
Correct. It is a good place to start, though. I would like to say that. We are very happy that IIJA passed and that there is infrastructure funding. However, we would like to see more long-term sustainable funding sources. IIJA is kind of just a shot in the arm to get us going, but we kind of need something to help continue the forward progress that we're going to be making with the IIJA funding.
What does the American Society of Civil Engineers recommend at the state policy level when looking at our infrastructure needs?
At the state policy level, there are a few things that we recommend. First of all, we would like to see an increase in the gas tax. It has not been increased in over 30 years, and that's really what the Mississippi Department of Transportation uses in order to fund bridge and road projects. We would also like to see some additional funding from the state legislature on drinking water and wastewater very specifically. And we would like to recommend the establishment of a 21st century technical career training program for drinking water and wastewater sectors. One of the concerns that we have seen in the city of Jackson is that the OB Curtis was understaffed. So not only are we dealing with a funding problem, but we are also dealing with a problem with staffing. And we think that putting funding into staffing for technical career tracks could also help some of these concerns that we have.
Dr. Jennifer Sloane Ziegler, thanks again for joining us. I appreciate your time.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
All right, and we'll be right back. Big thanks to Corey Stern, Dr. Jennifer Sloane Ziegler, and Insight contributors Tao Ta and Richard Lake. We'll be back next weekend with more of the political and current affairs coverage that you demand. I'm Byron Brown. From all of us here at 12 News, make it a great weekend.